Hey YouTube, welcome back to the TCG Runaways YouTube channel. I'm Daniel Rutkowski. I wanted to do a primer for the ProQuest season. I've had quite a few comments and requests to kind of get an update on what I've been playing, what the team's been working on, our thoughts on for the ProQuest season. So I figured I'd cover that all in this video. So what I want to do first is cover the worlds list, which you see on the screen now. Kind of break that down just a tiny bit. So let's jump in. So this list was very good into an aggro meta. We were expecting a fair amount of Briar and other Fies, and we had a very aggressive game plan into them, right? We were planning to use our Furnace to block, to deny hit trigger value, and then kind of shorten the game with the Pouncing Links. And like a full combo package. We had Spreading Flames, Rise from the Ashes, pretty much all the combo pieces you can run. Other than like Blossom of Spring, we did still value the ability to block pretty highly. So I think that's where this list is kind of best. I think it's a very playable list into any meta. If you're just picking it up and starting with this one, I think it's a totally fine starting point. I think where it struggles is into Rangers. It really just disruptive decks. Um, like Oldhim, we were kind of accepting a 40 to 45% win rate in that matchup. That's at least what we perceived it to be. I do think it's one of the weak spots of the deck. We're kind of all in on using three flames in most matchups. It's a very punishing card to draw at the wrong time. Um, we didn't have a ton of block threes in the deck, so not being able to block the red effects can lead to inefficiencies, stuff like that. If you've been playing the list, you've probably noticed you might have some issues into Guardians and Rangers already. It certainly still has play into them. It's just kind of the matchups we were sacrificing when we put this list together. Other than that, like the list plays really well. The only change I think it's important to address, I think we got the blues wrong. We kind of agreed on a team afterwards as well. Um, the issue with our blues is we kind of have these two utility blues with This Round's on Me and Energy Potion. Utility is probably the wrong word. Like these were tools for specific matchups, right? This Round's on Me to slow down aggro decks, Energy Potion to kind of combat disruptive decks. The rest of the blues, none of them have Go again. None of them are Draconic. You of course need your Minnowisms. So the issue is if you draw two or more blues in a hand, you're kind of bricked. You're either forced to snap or you just don't have Go again access without paying 3 for a Phoenix Flame. So we'll go through your blue options later on, but things like Blue Mounting Anger, starters, even like Cinderskin Devotion. So on those like 3 blue hands, you have access to a Go again attack and can continue to apply pressure. But yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on our worlds list. Again, totally fine starting point. Notice issues, make some changes. I think that's the big thing I want to address on this video. I don't have kind of a deck list to provide. Like it's not as simple as this is the list you should be playing this ProQuest season. Um, I think it comes down to understanding the core of the deck, and then what I'll be covering today is kind of all the tools you have available. And it really does come down to kind of making meta calls, making like the choice of what you want to run based on your playstyle and that kind of thing. So let's jump into it. What I have on the screen here in this like left section is what I consider the core of the deck. You have your typical Draconic cards. Blazes, just pretty efficient, 0 for 4, sometimes Go again. You obviously want to play all of the 0 for 3 starters. They're like the most core to the deck for sure. Lava Burst is just a very good rate. 0 for 5 on a card is insane, 6 with Chuko. And in matchups where it can be hard to get to Chain Link for, it at least blocks for 3, which in those matchups is extremely relevant. Mounting Anger is pretty much, at this point, at least the best one cost starter. I think you want at least 5 additional red starters. There's a few options that we'll talk through. I think Mounting Anger is kind of an auto include right now, though. The other reds are Snatches. Snatches is an insane card. It's like already at rate, attacking for 4 at 0 cost, and if you draw a card, it's just insane. And what Fi loves to do is make their opponent block, so then you get to keep your hand and keep the tempo and keep pushing. I have the Soaring Strikes at the bottom here. This is kind of one of those choices I mentioned. The alternative would be something like an Engulfing Flame Wave or Spreading Flames. With Spreading Flames, you're kind of just sacking consistency for a higher ceiling, where the Soaring Strike is kind of you're just accepting your forego again rate, which is a fine rate. You just don't want to draw multiple one costs in a hand with one blue. And it also has a really relevant hit effect. So if you're leaning towards Mask of Momentum, starting the combat chain with something like Soaring Strike is really difficult for your opponent. Um, they basically need to decide to commit to blocking both attacks or figure out which is better to block without much information at all. They'll see your pitch card, they'll see the Soaring Strike, and that's it. I think I have 15 blues here. That's probably the minimum I recommend running. We'll talk more on blues later. These are kind of what I see as the core blues. Highly recommend blue snatches. There's definitely a world where playing 2 instead of 3 makes sense. That's kind of a decision you can make. Same with the 0 for 3 attacks. I would pretty much always have the soul beads in your deck. Sometimes like endgame, the hit effect is super relevant, especially if you have like no other access to go again. The card's insane against Dromai. It's just the best 0 for 3 blue block 3 that we have. I currently have 4 others. That's somewhat of a meta choice, right? Like if you don't feel you need the block 3s, if your game plan ends up being to just attack aggressively as possible, you can look at shifting some of those to starters or something as well. 2 blue minnows in the deck. You run 2 because on hands where you have a belittle and a minnow already in hand, you still have a tutor target. There's also some matchups where you're forced to block with minnowism, like guardians and rangers specifically. There are times where you could consider boarding one out. That's kind of up to you. I don't recommend that in the guardian and ranger matchup again. For the other blues, we have our draconic ones, kind of the change from the world's list I mentioned. So running 2-manning Anger Blue right now. The card's pretty insane for a blue. If it hits, it becomes a 1 for 3 go again. And if you trigger Shuko, it's a 1 for 4, which is on rate with red cards with go again. So definitely recommend those as your first starter. Again, you can have issues supporting 2/1 costs in the same hand, but if you're playing the blue mounting anger, that means you have another blue in hand, so you can kind of decide that way. Next to that, we have the Cinder Skin Devotion. Used to be pretty low on the card, but again, the more blues you play, the more likely you are to need access to Draconic and go against. And this one, blocking 3 is super relevant too. Going on to the yellows, so this section here, this is kind of my core package for the pouncing links. If you're using momentum, you definitely can side any number of these out. I tend to play the extra yellow starter in most matchups. It just kind of gets me to the density that I like having for consistency purposes. This brand could be a yellow rising resentment instead, if you prefer having access to the cost reduction. It's kind of just a choice for you to make, whether you think the draconic chain links are more relevant. Salt the Wound is just your big finisher against aggro decks. Matchups where your opponent is incentivized not to block so that they can raise your damage. Salt the Wound pretty consistently in those matchups goes 1 to 2 points of damage above Lava Burst. So you're looking to cash in your links for like 7 or 8 damage there. And then the Yellow Belittle is just a really nice tool to have access to on like a tutor basis. Um, so if you have a hand that really needs resources or like extra resources to like CNC at the end or something, you can do plays where you like lead with the belittle or whatever attack it hits, and then you tutor up the extra belittle to get your additional resources. So that covers the core. What I want to talk about now is all of the different tools we have access to as Fi. Certainly not all of them, but the most relevant ones, and you can see there's quite a few. And this is where, again, you kind of have to make your own decisions about your expected meta, how you like to play the deck, all that good stuff. So first, let's go over to the equipment. So Blazing Euro is a cool one that I've seen popping up lately. So it says if it's defending on chain link 4 or higher, it has +4. So you're effectively looking to get 5 block value out of this in some matchups. I think the only matchup where it's relevant is Fi, maybe Katsu. I think this card is very effective at punishing people playing Pouncing Links in the mirror, which we were previously doing. Because to get max value out of your Pouncing Links, you have to be getting either a Rupture target, like Lava Burst, or Salt the Wound, which both care about being played as like the high at chain link 4 or higher. So you're pretty much guaranteed to either get value that way or by forcing them to tutor something smaller or blocking with the links. It's pretty tricky though, because if they're playing Mask of Momentum, it's not unreasonable that they can deny your value by never going to Chainlink 4. The only time they would have to, if they're not playing Salt the Wound, is for Lava Burst. But it basically, they only need to get to Chainlink 3 to threaten Mask, so they can do that, break the chain, and try to do it again even. If you have 2 starters in your hand, it's usually not difficult to do so. So that's just an interesting choice. If you know for a fact your opponent's on Pouncing Links, it's probably a good idea to play the Euro. If you can fit it in the deck. I know the sideboard slots can be tight at times. So Mask of Momentum, just a few quick thoughts. This card's been around for a while. A lot of people understand what it does. The biggest thing is it encourages your opponent to block, but it also like makes your opponent make decisions, right? Like one of the downsides of the Pouncing Links is that it's very advertised. Like your opponent knows they're taking 6, 7, or 8 damage at some point this game, and they can like plan for that accordingly. There are some blocking decisions there to kind of minimize that, but not to the extent of Mask Momentum, which every turn, sometimes multiple times a turn, is asking your opponent if it's correct to block a certain attack or not. Besides that, it's a nice tool against Bravo to kind of keep them off pummels. It's basically either they keep a full grip so they can pummel you, but you kind of offset that because you're drawing a card from Mask Momentum, or they're blocking down to 3 or 4 cards, which usually means they don't have enough money to pummel and or dominate. Just a good tool in that matchup. Pouncing Links, it's basically used to shorten the game. It's a very high rate on a card. Like you can reasonably expect 6 points of damage out of it every game. I like it best against a deck like Briar because it gives them less time to find CMH. So you basically just want to think about what matchups you want to end very quickly, and you think your advantage in that way. And I think Briar is a good example. You also don't want to play the momentum against decks that like to block like 2 cards a turn. It like almost has no impact in those matchups. Things like Icelander and Oldhim. So that's why I like the links better there. One note, just be careful using links against Icelander. If you're not super familiar with the rules, the way that like attacks kind of process, there's a few different steps where your opponent and yourself have priority to play instance. But basically, after an attack hits, your pouncing links goes on the stack in the resolution layer. After you resolve the links and banish a card, there is a window where both players need to pass before your attack finishes resolving. So there's a chance for Icelander or Oldhim even, same thing, to play a Blizzard, which if you have no cards in hand or not enough resources means that your links is wasted because you now can't cast the card that you tutored. So just be careful with that. Try to find spots where it's safe when using the links in those matchups. Next we have the Furnace. Furnace is kind of just like a very safe value card. You're going to get 3 block out of it in almost every matchup. Certainly not Kano. Icelander can be tricky depending on what they draw, what they play in their deck. Where it's really good is against ninjas. It allows you to block 2 Mask of Momentum triggers usually, whether it's just the Furnace or Furnace plus a card each time. And kind of same thing for other matchups with important hit effects. It just gives you armor access on 2 separate attacks, which is really nice. The other use is, of course, its activated ability, the once per turn instant, um, which can be really useful for playing around Disruption, and also hands where you have all reds, and you have to pay for like a 1-cost starter, then you can pitch another red or ideally a Phoenix Flame to get 2 resources for your Ember Blade. But against Disruption, you get to do some nice plays where if you get ice reacted and you have 1 card in hand, probably the Oldhim shouldn't be ice reacting there, but it basically denies them that opportunity because you can pitch into the Flamescale Furnace in response. and have the leftover mana floating. Um, Also, things like when Icelander is presenting you with a Frostbite effect or a Blizzard, you can pitch your red, your blue, whatever you have into it, um, and float that mana so that it now has a better use. Most of these scenarios are when you have one card in hand, but if you have one card in hand, you can kind of figure out the best way to pay into the furnace. So if they Ice Vein instead of discarding a pay two, you can pay one to the furnace, maybe go up resources, and then choose to discard when you have no cards left. Not the best explanation, but it has a lot of utilities, which I definitely recommend getting practice using it and looking for like different spots. It being an instant is the key there. Tunic, I'm sure everyone knows about Fine Spring Tunic by now. What it's really good at in those ice matchups again is denying Coronet Peak and Winter's Bite. So they're both effects that require you to discard or pay one. And having your Tunic on 3 resources usually means your opponent doesn't play those, or their hand forces them to, and you don't lose any cards, you just lose your Tunic counter. Just be careful not to activate it when Channel Lake Frigid is up, because you'll have to pay one to get your resource. It also allows for big spike turns off of something like Belittle or Art of War. Having the free resource to play your Belittle and then get your tutor basically just gets you a free card. And it's insane with Art of War for the same reason. I think it's great for matchups where you're not really incentivized to block with your equipment. So like decks with low disruption and just damage, like Brutes and Dromai. Um, you're kind of just racing and caring about your damage output in those matchups. So I think it's really good there. So Engulfing Flame Wave is a really interesting one. I like it best for front-loading damage against defensively disruptive decks. So again, a lot of this is targeted at Icelander Oldhim. They're kind of the other two top decks in the meta. But just being able to front load your damage, so you're going like one below rate of a normal two cost six. But it has go again in the case that you are able to continue your chain without being disrupted. And also has a very relevant on hit ability that makes your opponent make a decision right away before they know more about your hand. Now, the downside of Engulfing Flame Wave is the 2 cost. Inherently, in this deck, we're playing Ember Blade, which means any card that costs more than 1 is inefficient. You cannot, off of 1 blue, pay for your weapon and Engulfing Flame Wave. To make up for that, you have to run additional blues usually, or play more Belittles, or just be patient. You pretty much only want to be playing Flame Wave where it's super impactful and making your opponent block will lead to like a huge tempo gain. Or you want to wait until you have access to 2 blues in one turn. That's where it like really shines. Going on to attack reactions, there's 3 reasonable options. You could probably look at lunging press as well as a blue trick. The black 2 is a little rough on it though. So let's talk about Ancestral first. It's the most different of the other two. I don't actually recommend playing Ancestral. Like it's really only good when you have all the tempo. It drawing into a mystery card usually incentivizes you to block 3 with it. And the big reason you would play this card over something like Razor, I think, is the block 3. And in those matchups, you're always just going to block with it. So it's actually, I think it's kind of bad there. You can play with it though. It's certainly like in a vacuum, the card is very good. But let's talk about the other two. So where attack reacts are best currently are again for punishing the disruptive ice decks. The big one being Oldham's ice react. We talked before, if you're playing Furnace and you have one card in hand, they can't really ice react to you unless they're okay with trading their card for 1 resource, potentially none, because you just pitch it to the Furnace and float your mana. With attack reacts, they now get punished when you have 2 cards in hand, which is the normal use case, right? Because you'll play a 1-cost starter and pitch. No, I'm sorry, that's not a good use case because you have 2 floating. But yeah, if you have 2 cards in hand and they try to ice react you, which I think Oldhams do tend to want to kind of see how your turn progresses before they decide if they need to or not. Probably looking to keep their cards for a big attack. You can then respond with a blue, or paying a blue for one of these 1-cost attack reacts, get your +3 to your attack right away, and then also have 2 floating for an Ember Blade or follow-up or an Arsenal card, or just to pick up your flame. That's kind of the best case for them. I don't always love running them. They've kind of been in and out of my lists. Rapid Reflex is in here. It's kind of a theory card. Um, in those cases, it's really only the +3 that we care about, and the deck runs a ton of 0 costs. And those are also matchups where I value the 3 block very highly. So that's an option. If you want the 3 block and you want to use it that way, you could consider Rapid Reflex. You do lose the sometimes go again that you would gain from a Razor on like a Snatch or something. But usually you want to be ending your chain with a Snatch, so it's kind of the same effect. You'll get your draw either way. Next we have the block 4 defense reactions. I think most finalists have been running 3 sync belows for a long time. I still highly recommend those for your Guardian matchups. Bravo being the big one there. There's a lot of ways to really punish Bravo when they go for like dominate plays if you have a D-react set. Um, they're almost always sacrificing tempo, efficiency, value, whatever, to play these big dominate attacks. And if you can mitigate it with like just some armor and a D-react from Arsenal, or even just one card in hand, it's pretty punishing, and you really take back the tempo and get to try to loop. So against Bravo, I recommend at least the 3 syncs. You can definitely consider adding like a 4th Fate Foreseen, maybe a 5th. I probably wouldn't recommend going above 4, but you could try that out. They're a great tool in the matchup. Their weapon attacks for 4 minimum, which is super relevant in the end game if you're both at 1. Without the D-React, you kind of just lose because they have access to a 1-card 4. And being able to sync that away and have a 3-card hand is how you finally take their full hand and loop them until they don't have enough block value. Against Oldhim, it's a little tricky. There's things like Channel Lake Frigid, which means you'd have to pay 1 for a D-React. So if the timing doesn't line up, they're pretty bad. But on the other side of that, the Winter's Whale can be extremely disruptive for Fi. It's not easy for Fi to block 4, and there are cases where the 1 Frostbite can like really mess your turn up. So you could definitely try playing maybe 2, maybe 3, some number in the Oldhim matchup as well. Just understand kind of the upside and downside there. You like give up some consistency for trying to get a little more of a power spike by lining up that block. Oh, they're great for Dorinthia too. That's a matchup where you kind of take like a on turn where you're attacking, giving them a counter or 2 in exchange for dealing damage to them, and then you want to have an off turn where you're blocking. And there are cards that Dorinthia has access to that kind of just get you. So being able to D-react over the top to not let them get their counters, or even just to say no block on some Dawnblade attacks and then play the D-react from Arsenal, um, denying their triggers, is a pretty big deal. So next, let's talk about Phoenix Flames. You certainly always want to play 1. That's kind of the biggest, a big draw of Fi is that you have this free card every turn, whether it's 1 point of damage or more. I guess sometimes 0, but it enables other things. There may be spots where you only want to play 1. Like it's usually your worst draw in any given game. And matchups where your opponent's playing disruptive attacks and you need to be blocking, they can be problematic. So it's something you can consider. Um, when you're playing your combo pieces, which we'll jump down and talk about those next, I'd recommend playing at least 2 Phoenix Flames. Because you're playing Flameclaw Awakening, so you want a tutor target. And ideally, you're looking to find a spot where you can banish that extra Phoenix Flame to an Art of War, just to really get max value out of it. The case for 3 Phoenix Flames is if you're expecting your opponent to be on a fatigue strategy or just a really slow game. You can do a lot of like tricks with the Phoenix Flames, things like bottoming them to E-Strikes and then recurring them with Phoenix Flame. I'm sorry, Flameclaw Awakening. Just some really good value plays there. Against Fatigue specifically, you probably should be playing to a line where you're able to banish a Phoenix Flame to an Art of War. as just one of your really big high damage turns. And if you do that, you need access to 2 flame still for kind of the end game loop. When you're low on threats, you want to be able to pitch a blue on your opponent's turn, pick up your flame, um, have that as your starter for the turn, into the Ember Blade for 3, into picking up the other flame for 2 off of Shuko, and then usually having another blue as a finisher. So that's a loop that costs you 1 card, or potentially 0 if you don't have a blue finisher, but it'll cost your opponent 1 to 3 cards to block, depending on their health total. So yeah, just make sure if you know they're on fatigue, you have access to 3. If you think fatigue's out of the meta, you could consider not even having 3 in your deck. Let's talk about the combo package really quick. Probably should have hit on that earlier. So that's these 4 cards here. Again, you need the extra flame for banishing to Artivore and to have a tutor target for Flame Call Awakening. These cards just really, in combination with each other, give you much more damage output. Rise from the Ashes, I guess, could have been in the core components. The only real issue with it is that it gives your opponent priority to like give you some frostbites that you're not ready to deal with or something like that. Also breaks the chain if you like draw it off of Artivore. Worst case, it acts as the 0 for 3 starter, picking up the flame and giving it +3. So it's very good there. But if you have another starter already, Rise from the Ashes comes to 0 for 4, which is just a good rate with Go again. So yeah, again, the big power play is some kind of Flame Call, Rise from the Ashes play to get a Phoenix Flame and then banish it to Artivore. Just to like massively go up on damage that turn. And that's kind of up to you what matchups you want to side these in for. One thing I will say, like certainly you want to be doing this against like the decks that don't have disruption, like the Brutes and Dromai. What you can consider if you find there are matchups you're struggling into, I think practice is the number 1 thing, but adding some of these cards that sacrifice consistency but increase your ceiling pretty dramatically, they could be a good tool. Basically, just giving you an out to always play to. Just setting up for these big combo plays and hoping that they don't have a CNC or some kind of disruption like a choke slam. Okay, going back up, let's talk about Erase Face. So this is a pretty simple one. It basically forces Viserai in most cases, Boost Dash in almost every case to block this attack. It's pretty uncommon that they have another better option. If you want a card in those matchups that you can just play it, force 2 cards out of their hand, maybe 3, probably 2 though, and just allow you to kind of like set a combo piece, have a pivot turn. It's a great tool for that. Might not be necessary. It's kind of up to you. It's a good one to try out in those matchups though and see if you like it. It again has the same cost as, same issue rather as Engulfing Flame Wave because of the cost. Costing 2 means either you're sacking some efficiencies or you're waiting until you have access to 2 blues. It is a pretty good 2-card hand though, more so than the Flame Wave. You can do something like block their hit trigger, like a Moth Skies or something, with a card, and then throw this with 2 cards, and then set the other for that combo turn. Command and Conquer, again, pretty well-known card. It's great into any hero that's not playing Providence, attacking their arsenal. If they set one, that is the risk. If they don't set an arsenal, you kind of can get punished having this linger around. Attacking for 6 off of 2 costs isn't terrible, but it's not really where you want to be as 5. This card also has potential to be really punishing into fatigue strategies and like very defense reaction heavy decks. Um, Definitely don't want to forget that text line that says defense reactions can't be played on this chain link. It's not uncommon for opponents to save like a sync below for your snatch at the end of the chain, and if you end with a command and conquer instead, they're now stuck with that sync, which doesn't pitch for resources efficiently, um, and maybe they have to lose their arsenal as well to still level play. That's kind of a similar, like, you're going for upside versus consistency play. But at the same time, like, it's not an inconsistent card, right? It's a good rate, 6 damage for 2, blocks for 3. It just has that cost curve issue of not working with the Ember Blade. Going back to that efficiency though, like, having access to efficient 2-card plays, is really nice against disruptive decks. that tax your hand, and also that can potentially punish your go against, like Olden with his Ice Reactant Stalagmite or Icelander with all of her disruption. Being able to just throw this consistent attack and maybe set a card or even not um, is usually a pretty high value play. Um, it's also nice against Icelander that you have 1 mana floating off of a blue. So if they do decide to Waning Moon you, you effectively got 7 damage out of your 2 cards. Enlightened Strike shares the same thing, just a very efficient 2-card play. This one doesn't require a blue. It's very flexible. Um, Against Disruption, it can block 3. It can be used as a 2-card hand. It can draw you a card. You can use the snaps in a pinch. It just has a lot of different modes, and that kind of enables it to line up with Disruption really well because you have the flexibility to decide how to use this card. It also offers a bit of a power spike if you're able to bottom your Phoenix Flame or like an extra Minnowism off of a Belittle. Um, you're basically getting this effect for free or at the cost of like 1 damage, and just looking at the gain +2, you're going up a damage there. Okay, moving on. Let's talk about Arcane Berry really quick. I recommend at least 1 for Icelander, really just to increase your life total at the end of the game. I would be running the Tide Flippers in that spot. I recommend trying to keep them around for as long as you can. But if you find yourself with like a Lava Burst into Assault the Wound or second Lava Burst play where you know they can't disrupt it, you probably have to just cash it in. It's a very tight matchup. You want to take your damage when you can get it. Having access to AB1 in that matchup specifically gives you more flexibility through disruption, right? They might be able to like completely jam your turn with a blizzard or hypothermia or something, and having a way to at least use your cards to block 1, even though it's a bad rate, it's much better than getting nothing out of them and just being stuck in your hand. Kano, that's where I would consider the robe. You could run 2 into him. I just recommend at least 1. Again, you just want to increase your life threshold by a little bit. 1 AB against Kano when they're comboing is worth quite a lot more than that. Usually the game plays where it takes you 2 turns to put them within lethal range, usually between like 1 and 5 health. And usually on your 3rd turn, you'll play your attack presenting lethal, and they'll try to kill you. So having access to that AB kind of lets you deny that, but they usually have to go for it anyway. Next, let's talk about this round's on me. Yeah, so this card can be very effective against Phi, Dash, maybe sometimes Briar. Decks with a lot of go again attacks. It has potential to go like way above rate, like -6 your opponent. It also incentivizes them to block if you're taxing their attacks, which usually attacks will be like 1 point above rate in aggro decks versus blocking. So this card kind of incentivizes you to maybe block instead. Yeah, this card's also pretty insane turn 0. I think if you're playing this card, that's mostly what you're playing for. If you draw this turn 0 against any aggro deck, their extra card that they draw is just wasted because they'll be leaking a considerable amount of damage, most likely to keep a full 5-card hand, which in almost every case will not be worth it instead of just blocking. So you're just getting free -1 to all of their attacks. I think that's the best case for this card. It's really bad against non-go again decks. It's a blue block 3 at base, so like it's not the worst if you have to play it there. But like any other Cinderskin Devotion, Wounding Blow, any other blue that blocks 3 but also attacks or provides some other value would be better. So you are sacrificing that to have this in your deck. It can also be punished when it's not turn 0. I think that's one of the appeals of Spreading Flames, which we'll talk about next. But if you draw your opponent into a Channel Mount Heroic, an Artivore, Spreading Flames, it just offsets the effect and sometimes even puts your opponent plus. Just something to be careful of. For like newer players, if you don't have this Rounds on Me, I don't really recommend it at the current price, but it's kind of up to you. It can be extremely powerful in some spots. So talking about Spreading Flames, I think a big appeal is that it counters this Rounds on Me. This Rounds on Me gives your attacks -1, and Spreading Flames comes in and gives some of your attacks the +1 back, which is very good. It's another one of those like it gives you a much higher damage ceiling. Could have some really spiky turns with this combined with like a Flame Call Awakening, which is nice in an aggro meta. But against like disruptive decks, you risk it being a below rate attack. It's not uncommon in those ice matchups that this is just a 1 for 3 go again that you kind of have to play out. So it's really a ceiling versus consistency thing. Again, something you can kind of decide how you want to play the deck. Energy Potion is a nice tool. Doesn't block, which can be an issue. It's nice as a finisher. It can kind of create scenarios where your opponent's waiting to block your last attack, thinking it's like a snatch or a lava burst, something big that they're saving their block 4 for. And if you end with an energy potion instead, they're just stuck with this card in hand that they didn't want. That's kind of one of the big like upside plays that could potentially happen. Once it's on the field, though, it allows for some big combo plays for me, right? It's like a replacement Tunic. If you're not playing Tunic, you can use it to pay for your Art of War or Belittle, which is a huge power spike. Again, you're basically just got a free card out of it on your big combo turn. In some spots, it even pays for your whole turn, right? You can go, if you have 2 0 costs, like a Rising Resentment into a Blaze, you can pop the Energy Potion to get to your Sword and your Phoenix Flame, and you got 4 points of value out of it, which is a pretty good rate. The other thing, it can be used in a pinch to block Disruption. Aether Ice Vein, Coronet Peak, Blizzard, Winter's Bite, all those effects, if it makes sense to protect your hand, you can respond with Energy Potion and pay that way. The last thing, against Fatigue decks, if you find yourself in a Fatigue matchup, again, you could strand cards in their hand when you finish with this card, but it also basically delays damage. So instead of ending with like a 3 damage blue this turn, you're putting this energy potion into play, and then on a turn where you've already taken their hand, you're now able to go over the top. Next, there are the good block 3s, which the CNC and E-Strike kind of tie into as well. These are great in matchups where you want to block, right? Things like Guardians with their crush effects, Rangers with just a ton of on hits that they have, whether it's giving you a frostbite or discarding a card or dealing extra damage. Just having a density of 3 blocks, I think, is a really big way to make your Bravo matchup better. So it's kind of the use for these. You can kind of decide if you want to fit them in or not. Things like Take the Temple and Soulbeat Strike are probably a bit better with Mask of Momentum over Pouncing Links, but still good in both. Having access to extra Salta wounds probably makes your aggro matchups a bit better as well. Yeah, really just any of these 3 blocks that are good cards you can consider if you want a higher density of cards that block for 3. Okay, so last category here is blues and belittle. So I think I said 15 minimum for like most matchups. I'd probably be running a bit more than that, probably 16 for aggro matchups. Against a deck like Icelander, I think I would play up to 25 blues if I could. It's just not realistic to fit those. You do sacrifice your damage ceiling a bit by doing so as well. So I'd recommend up to 20 blues. And these are kind of the types of blues you could consider adding. I certainly would add some amount of Draconic blues as you increase. Something like Soaring Strike. Quick note there, if you're not playing Ancestral Empowerment, you don't need to be playing like Winds of Eternity. It's a Majestic, it might cost a few bucks. You can just be playing Wounding Blow, and it's the exact same card in this deck. But yeah, so you definitely want Mounting Anger if you're going up blues. These are your best 3 block options, and then I like these two as additional Pouncing Links targets. So against like Icelander, you get to your density of blues that you want, maybe for like Oldhim too. But in matchups where you're playing Pouncing Links, you can swap these blues in for 2 of your other blues, and now you have a tutor effect that could potentially reduce the cost of your next attack. Attacks for 1 are super annoying to block if your opponent doesn't have like 1 armor available. Trading a whole card to stop a 1 is like probably never something your opponent wants to do. So it's a tool to fix your curve if you need that discount. And then Soaring Strike is if you don't have Go again. on some of your cards. Like say you have two snatches or something in hand, you can tutor one of these up and either get your opponent to block, which is usually profitable, or they let it hit and now you have your go again. So yeah, those are kind of all of the tools that I'm looking at currently. I know there's quite a few. Certainly don't try to like swap them all in at once. It's a lot of cards in the core deck, so like it's not too many decisions that have to be made, but it really comes down to your meta. Do you want more block threes? Do you want more blues? Do you just want to be more aggressive because you like playing combo fi? Like those are all fine and reasonable choices. You kind of just have to understand the matchups that you're looking to target and then understand how these cards are used and decide which ones you want in your deck. So yeah, thanks for watching, thanks for listening. Be sure to like the video if it was helpful, subscribe to our channel, and I'll see you guys next time.